Officer Travis Kane believed Oak Haven County belonged to him. He lived for the badge, the heavy-duty belt, and the way people's faces changed when his blue lights filled their mirrors. That rainy Tuesday, he was sure he'd caught a thief in a stolen luxury ride, someone out of place. When she warned him calmly, he smiled like a man who couldn't imagine consequences. He ridiculed her composure and told her to save the performance for court. What he didn't know, couldn't even process, was that the woman he was snapping cuffs onto, Judge Marissa Langford, wouldn't be appearing before a judge the next morning. She was the judge. And when he stepped into her courtroom within 24 hours, the color would leave his face like the tide running out. Fast, rain in Oak Haven didn't cleanse anything. It only made the roads slick and the shadows stretched longer. For Marissa Langford, the steady sweep of windshield wipers across her silver Mercedes GLE usually calmed her, like a metronome counting down to home. Heels off, silence on. Tonight, though, the darkness beyond the glass felt heavier, like the town itself was holding its breath. It had been a brutal week. At 47, Marissa had just won her seat on the Superior Court bench. Historic, controversial, and loudly resented in the conservative district. Exhaustion sat deep in her bones, not just from files and motions, but from the invisible armor she had to wear every time she walked outside. She carried it everywhere, even in a quiet car. She adjusted the rearview mirror and caught her own reflection for a heartbeat. Impeccable, even now. Hair pinned into a strict professional knot. Silk blouse crisp, pearls understated. Her expression, steel, slipping even slightly, wasn't allowed in her position. She was cutting through the town's jagged seam where Oak Haven Hills faded into the older industrial blocks, where assumptions hunted first and asked later. She'd taken a shortcut to dodge interstate construction, one she knew by memory. But tonight, the route felt different, thick with oppressive dark. Then the cabin exploded with violent red and blue flashes. Marissa exhaled, grip tightening on leather. Speedometer, 35 in a 35. Nothing reckless, nothing wrong. Yet the light stayed glued to her like suspicion had teeth. Registration current. Insurance valid. Taillights working. She ran the checklist automatically, a habit built from decades of knowing how quickly routine could twist. She signaled, eased onto the gravel shoulder, and felt stones crunch beneath her tires. Calm wasn't a mood for her. It was a strategy. She refused to give panic to anyone who was looking for it. She shifted into park, clicked on the dome light, and placed both hands high on the steering wheel. Clear, visible, deliberate. In the side mirror, she watched the patrolman approach with swagger. That walk, she'd seen it from the bench 1,000 times. The walk of a man convinced the universe bent around his authority. Headlights swept and briefly lit the name tag, T. Kane. He didn't tap the window like a professional. He hammered it with the heavy end of his flashlight. Marissa lowered the glass smoothly, controlled. Rain hissed on asphalt. He leaned in like her car was his property and her time was his right. Buzz cut, hard jaw, early 30s, full of certainty. Power sat on him like a warm coat he never wanted to remove. "Good evening, officer," Marissa began. "Is there an issue?" Kane didn't answer. He blasted his flashlight straight into her eyes, letting the beam linger like an accusation. "License and registration," he barked. No courtesy, no respect, none of the politeness usually reserved for drivers in vehicles like this. He sounded like he'd already decided the story, and needed her to play her part. "May I ask why I was stopped?" she said, calm and even, courtroom controlled. Kane's lip curled. "You can ask questions after you hand me your ID," he snapped. "Now! Or do I need to help you?" Heat crawled up Marissa's neck, but her face stayed composed. She'd learned long ago that showing emotion to the wrong person could become their excuse. She reached slowly toward her purse. "I'm retrieving my license," she narrated clearly, the way safety training's advised. Kane muttered, "Faster," with his hand resting too casually on his holster. She handed him the card. He snatched it, barely glancing at her name. His attention drifted instead to the Mercedes, its clean lines, its shine, the symbol it carried in this county. "Nice ride," he said, sneer sharp as glass. "This yours?" "Yes," Marissa replied. "Bought it 2 weeks ago." Kane let out a disbelieving little sound, leaning closer until stale coffee and rain rode into her cabin. "We've had reports," he said, voice thick with satisfaction. "High-end vehicles boosted from the hills. Silver SUV, driven by—" He let his eyes finish the sentence. "Driven by whom, officer?" Marissa held his gaze, refusing to flinch. Kane shrugged like the answer was obvious. "Someone who fits the description." He straightened. "Stay put." He strode back to his cruiser, shoulders squared with confidence. In the mirror, Marissa watched him lift his radio, watched him run plates like he was praying for a hit, hoping the system would justify what his bias already decided. She wasn't worried about the law. She was the law. She was worried about ego, about what men like Kane did when facts didn't match the story in their head. Rain intensified, drumming the roof harder. Minutes stretched. She checked her watch. 10:45 p.m. She had an 8 a.m. docket and no patience for games. Still, she stayed controlled. Finally, Kane emerged. Except now, he wasn't alone. A second cruiser slid in behind him, lights flashing silently through rain. 2 officers approached, hands hovering near belts, bodies angled like confrontation was the goal. Marissa's heart thudded, but her face stayed carved from stone. She'd seen this escalation pattern in testimony. She never expected to be standing in its crosshairs. "Step out of the vehicle!" Kane shouted, opening her door before she could even reach the lock. "Officer, what is the meaning?" Marissa started, undoing her seatbelt. "Out!" He grabbed her arm, grip bruising, and yanked her into the downpour. Cold water soaked her silk instantly. The street smelled like wet gravel and cheap authority. Kane's excitement was visible, like he'd finally found prey. "My name is Judge Marissa Langford," she said firmly, pulling her arm back without struggling. "Check the registration properly and you'll see." Kane laughed, harsh and loud, and spun her around. He slammed her against the side of her own Mercedes. Metal bit her cheek. "Sure," he mocked, "and I'm the governor." The humiliation wasn't accidental. It was the point. "You're under arrest for possession of a stolen vehicle." The handcuffs snapped shut. Cold steel, biting delicate skin. Marissa had heard that click echo through courtrooms for years, the sound of freedom ending for the guilty. She never imagined feeling it while innocent, in the rain, on the side of a road she'd driven 100 times. Her wrists burned immediately. "Officer Kane," she said, voice strained as he patted her down with unnecessary roughness. "You are making a catastrophic mistake. I'm a superior court judge for this county. My identification is in your hand." Kane leaned closer, voice venomous. "I saw a fake ID." He tightened the cuffs until she winced. "And I saw stolen in the system. That's all I need." The plates don't match the VIN on file because the DMV made a clerical error, Marissa insisted, remembering her paperwork headache the week before. Run the VIN directly. Call your sergeant. Kane shook his head like she'd offered him comedy. I don't need a sergeant to haul in a car thief. He grabbed her shoulders and marched her toward his cruiser, triumph glowing in his eyes. They passed the second officer, a younger deputy named Nolan Price, who looked uneasy. Kane, Price murmured, eyeing Marissa's pearls and the authority in her posture. She doesn't look like our usual. Maybe we should double-check the VIN. Kane snapped, Don't teach me my job. He shoved Marissa forward. System flagged it. Probable cause. She'll explain downtown. Kane pushed her head down, pure humiliation, and stuffed her into the hard plastic back seat of the cage. The door slammed, sealing her inside a box that reeked of disinfectant and old vomit. Marissa sat upright anyway. She would not slump. Rain plastered her hair, ruining the careful image she maintained. But inside her chest, a colder thing formed, fury crystallizing into purpose. Kane climbed in front, shook Rain off his shoulders, and stared at her through the rearview mirror like he'd won something. Comfortable back there, Your Honor? He mocked. Marissa met his eyes without blinking. She wouldn't give him tears. She wouldn't give him anger. She would give him something worse. Memory. The kind that becomes evidence. Officer Kane, she said, voice low and lethal. Remember how certain you feel right now. He laughed, revving the engine. That a threat? It's an advisement, she replied. Neon lights smeared across wet streets as they drove. Marissa closed her eyes and centered herself. He wanted the combative suspect. He wanted a reason. She gave him silence, like a locked door. At the precinct, Kane paraded her through booking like a trophy. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Officers glanced up, some curious, some indifferent. Kane loved the attention. A felony arrest made his stats look pretty. Marissa stood soaked and cuffed, posture unbroken. She knew the room was watching, and she knew how quickly witnesses forgot details when no one forced them to remember. What have we got, Kane? Asked the desk sergeant, Sergeant Ramon Ellis, weary-eyed from years of night shifts. Kane announced loudly, Grand Theft Auto, caught her in a brand-new Benz. He tossed Marissa's purse onto the counter with a careless slap. She's claiming she's a judge. Ellis looked up, squinted, and paused. 20 years on the job taught him certain faces. Ellis's gaze sharpened as he took her in. Wet hair, bruised cheek, cuffs, yet holding herself like a queen. Name? He asked, voice suddenly careful. Marissa Langford, she said clearly. Ellis froze, like someone pulled the plug on the room's electricity. He glanced from the screen to Kane, then back to her. A flicker of fear crossed his face, followed by something like apology. Kane, Ellis said slowly, did you manually verify the VIN? Kane scoffed. System said stolen, Sarge. That's enough. Ellis's jaw tightened. We have to process her, he said, tone strange. Not meeting Kane's eyes, he looked at Marissa instead. Ma'am, fingerprints and a photo. Marissa nodded once. I understand the procedure. Do your job. Kane uncuffed her with a grin. Hands on the counter. Don't try anything. Marissa pressed fingers to the scanner, wrists raw, and watched Kane across the room. He was already reenacting the arrest near the coffee machine, laughing, miming how he shoved her against the car. He thought he was charming. He didn't realize he was painting a timeline for people who might one day be asked to testify. They led Marissa to a holding cell, gray concrete, metal bench, sour air. She sat and smoothed her wet skirt over her knees, controlling her breathing. She could have called the chief. She could have called the mayor she'd dined with 2 nights earlier. She could have ended this fast, but she chose not to. If she pulled rank now, Kane would claim honest mistake and learn nothing. No, this lesson had to be public. Absolute. She sat on cold metal and waited for morning like she was waiting for court, because she was. A holding cell was an equalizer. CEO or hustler, it didn't matter. Once the door clanged shut, you were just a body in a box. Marissa listened to the precinct noise and let every second harden her resolve. Across from her, a young woman huddled in the corner, maybe 19, denim jacket torn, shivering violently. Mascara streaked down her cheeks like black rivers. She stared at Marissa's silk blouse as if it belonged on a different planet. The girl's quiet fear filled the cell like cold smoke. Marissa recognized her instantly, someone the system chewed up and called procedure. "Ah, what you in for?" the girl whispered. Voice cracking, Marissa turned her head slowly. "Driving my own car," she replied, tone flat. The girl gave a dry laugh that sounded like pain. "They grabbed me for loitering," she muttered. "I was waiting for the bus." Her eyes flicked up. "You look fancy. They usually don't do this to fancy folks." "Incompetence doesn't check your tax bracket," Marissa murmured. The girl introduced herself as Tessa, and Marissa filed the name away like a case caption. Tessa was exactly who Marissa tried to protect from the bench. Collateral damage of officers who treated the badge like a hunting license instead of a shield. Marissa listened, quiet, letting the night's injustice widen into something bigger than her bruised cheek. Outside the cell, the graveyard shift hummed with chaotic energy. Marissa could hear Kane's voice, too loud, too pleased. "Clean bust," he bragged. She tried the "do you know who I am" routine. "Love that. Like I care." Laughter followed. Stolen ride is a stolen ride. Marissa closed her eyes, forcing herself to memorize every arrogant syllable for the record to come. 0 a.m., the shift commander, Lieutenant Harold Green, walked the cells. Green was a tired, decent man with 3 decades on the force and a permanent crease between his brows. His eyes skimmed drunks and petty thieves, then snagged hard on Marissa. He stopped, blinked, stepped closer to the bars like his brain refused the image. "Ma'am?" he asked, confused and low. Marissa stood and approached the bars with calm precision. "Good morning, Lieutenant Green," she said softly. "How is your wife recovering from her hip surgery?" Green went pale, white, immediate, terrified. He gripped the bars like they were the only thing holding him upright. "Judge Langford," he whispered. "Keep your voice down," Marissa ordered, sharp as a gavel tap. Green swallowed hard, keys rattling. This is insane," Green breathed. "I'll call the chief. I'll get you out right now." Marissa cut him off with one look. "You will not call the chief. You will not call the mayor. And you will not tell Officer Kane who I am." Green stared, stunned. "But you've been here for hours." "And I will stay until transport," she replied. "I want the full experience." Green's eyes widened as understanding clicked into place. "He's going to hang himself," Green whispered. Marissa's voice turned cold. "He already has. I'm just waiting for him to kick the chair away." She leaned in slightly. "Process my paperwork as Jane Doe until court. Can you do that?" Green hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." Marissa didn't thank him. This wasn't kindness. This was accountability. 0 a.m., the transport van arrived. Kane showed up looking fresh, coffee in hand, ready to escort his collar to arraignment and collect overtime. He shackled Marissa's ankles with casual confidence. "Morning, sunshine," he smirked. "Ready to meet the judge?" Marissa looked at him and let a small, terrifying smile touch her mouth. "Yes, officer. I'm very eager to see who's on the bench." The Oak Haven County Courthouse rose in marble and oak, built to make individuals feel small and the law feel massive. Downstairs, the holding area smelled like bleach and damp concrete. Marissa was processed at 7:45 a.m. The transport officers closed the door. Then, Lieutenant Green stepped from the shadows, pale and tense. He signaled the bailiff, Marcus Dale, who'd worked Marissa's courtroom for years. Dale looked from the paperwork to the woman in cuffs and nearly dropped his keys. Green hissed, "Unlock her, now!" Dale fumbled, hands shaking. The cuffs clicked open. Marissa rubbed her raw wrists like she was erasing the night with touch. "Get me to my chambers," she said, voice shifting instantly from inmate to magistrate. "And find heavy concealer. I have a bruise to cover before docket call." Dale stammered, "Yes, Judge." Green swallowed hard. "Kane is upstairs," he warned. "Courtroom 4. He's docketed to testify on the arrest." Marissa's eyes narrowed. "Is he?" She straightened her skirt and lifted her chin. "Back elevator. No one sees me." This wasn't about saving face. It was about controlling the moment. She would not enter her own courtroom as a spectacle. She would enter as authority. 20 minutes later, inside her chambers, transformation became ritual. The ruined blouse came off. Grime washed away. Makeup hid the purple mark where metal had kissed her cheek. Hair pulled into a flawless knot. Severe, exact. Then Marissa opened the closet and took down the black robe. It was heavy with meaning. When she slid into it, vulnerability vanished beneath fabric. She wasn't just a woman now. She was the state. She checked the docket. Case 4-2, People v. Jane Doe, arresting Officer T. Kane. Marissa picked up her gavel. It felt strangely light, as if the law itself was eager. Upstairs in courtroom 4, Kane lounged in the front row, chewing gum, phone in hand, grinning at the thought of bail and overtime. A felony arrest boosted numbers. He didn't know he'd just written his own cross-examination. Kane nudged the rookie beside him. "Watch this," he whispered. "DA's gonna chew her up. She gave me attitude all night, claimed she was a judge." The rookie chuckled. "People say anything to dodge cuffs." Kane grinned wider. "Exactly. Can't wait to see her face when bail hits 50 grand. The courtroom buzzed. Lawyers shuffling, families whispering, routine chaos before the storm. The clerk, Miss Pritchard, glanced at the clock. 8:30 a.m. "All rise!" Bailiff Dale's voice boomed, louder than usual, edged with something that made heads turn. Kane stood lazily, smoothing his uniform, expecting the usual judge rotation. The door behind the bench opened. A figure stepped out in black robes that moved like storm clouds. She crossed the room with predatory calm, scanning like a hawk. Marissa ascended the steps to the high bench, the great state seal looming behind her. Kane was looking down at his phone, mid-yawn, still confident. Dale recited, "The Superior Court of Oak Haven is now in session. The Honorable Judge Marissa Langford presiding." The name hung in the air like a trap closing. Kane's brain tried to reject it. Then reality landed. His phone slipped and clattered loudly in sudden silence. Kane looked up and froze. Not a simple pause. A full-body seizure of disbelief. High above him sat the woman he'd handcuffed, shoved, mocked, and locked in a cage. But she didn't look like a victim now. She looked untouchable. Her gaze locked on him, calm and clinical, like a scientist examining a specimen under glass. The courtroom sat. Kane remained standing, knees locked, mouth slightly open. "Officer Kane!" Marissa's voice rang out, amplified by Wood and Law. "Please take your seat. We have a long morning." He dropped into the bench like someone had cut his strings. Sweat sprang across his forehead. He glanced at the rookie, who stared toward the bench with respect. "That's her," the rookie whispered, confused. "That's the car thief." Kane hissed, "Shut up!" Panic sharpening every consonant. Marissa didn't pounce immediately. She let him marinate in fear. She called the first case. Simple traffic matter, different officer. While Kane sat trapped, heart battering his ribs like a caged bird. 20 minutes felt like punishment. Every time Marissa looked up, Kane felt sick. He wanted to run, but he couldn't leave. He was the arresting officer. His own paperwork had chained him to the bench. Finally, Marissa cleared her throat and lifted a specific file. "Case 402, she read, voice smooth. "The people versus—" She paused just long enough to sharpen the blade. "Marissa Langford." A ripple of confusion traveled the room. The district attorney, Colin Mercer, stood, flipping pages, blinking as if the ink had changed. "Your Honor," Mercer began, baffled, "my arraignment lists the defendant as, well, your name, Judge." "Does it?" Marissa replied, polite as ice. "And who is the complaining witness and arresting officer?" Mercer swallowed. "Officer Travis Kane." Marissa's tone dropped, one octave heavier. "Officer Kane," she said, and the courtroom seemed to lean forward. Kane's face was tight, eyes wide, mind scrambling for an exit that didn't exist. The rain, the cuffs, the cage, every moment came roaring back, now with a bench above it. Marissa didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Officer Kane," she repeated, letting the title officer weigh like a test he'd failed. Kane swallowed hard, gum forgotten. Mercer looked between them like he'd stumbled into a live wire. The public gallery shifted, sensing something beyond routine. Even the air felt different. Stale courtroom oxygen turned electric, waiting for the first official question that would turn arrogance into record. Kane's hands trembled slightly on his knees. He stared at the robe, the seal, the woman behind it, trying to reconcile last night's suspect with today's authority. Marissa's expression remained composed, almost detached, which frightened him more than anger would have. Detachment meant decision. It meant procedure, and procedure done correctly could ruin careers. With a calm voice and a clean transcript, Mercer cleared his throat again, still stunned. "Your Honor, how would you like to proceed?" Marissa's eyes didn't leave Kane. "I would like to proceed exactly as the law requires," she said. "We will address probable cause, arrest conduct, and identification verification. On the record?" Kane's breathing turned shallow. The phrase, "on the record," hit him like cuffs clicking shut. Only now the cuffs were words. Marissa shifted the file open, pages whispering like warning. She looked down briefly, then up again, gaze pinning Kane in place. The courtroom felt suddenly too quiet. Even Mercer stopped shuffling paper. Kane realized he'd been bragging about a clean bust all night, loud enough for half the station to hear. Those witnesses were now potential testimony. His jokes were now admissions. He wasn't flying. He'd been falling the whole time. "Officer Kane," Marissa said, voice measured, "when you initiated the stop, what was the specific traffic or equipment violation. Kane's mouth opened, then closed. He glanced at Mercer like he wanted help. Mercer's face said, "This isn't my fire." Kane forced words out. "It matched a bolo, stolen luxury vehicle." Marissa's eyebrows lifted a fraction. A bolo is not a substitute for verification. Did you confirm the VIN manually before arrest? Kane's throat worked. "The system flagged it," he said weakly. Marissa nodded slowly, as if teaching a class. "And when the defendant informed you she was Judge Marissa Langford and offered that the mismatch was a DMV clerical error, what steps did you take to confirm identity?" Kane's eyes flicked toward the gallery, toward the bailiff, toward anywhere but her. "I followed procedure," he lied, and everyone heard the tremor. Marissa turned one page. The sound was small, yet it cut. "Did you contact a supervisor?" she asked. Kane's silence answered first. Mercer shifted uncomfortably. Marissa continued, calm as a scalpel. "Did you allow the defendant to retrieve additional documentation? Did you run the VIN directly? Did you consider de-escalation when a second officer urged verification?" Kane's face shone with sweat. He could feel his own report tightening like a noose. The courtroom held its breath. Kane finally managed, "No, Your Honor." The admission dropped heavy. Marissa's gaze didn't change. No triumph, no mercy. Only law. She glanced at Mercer. "Mr. Mercer, based on the officer's statements and the documented registration, what is the state's position on probable cause and continued detention?" Mercer swallowed. The ripple in the gallery turned into a wave. Kane looked like he might be sick. Mercer's voice came out careful. "Your Honor, given the VIN verification and the officer's failure to confirm identity, the state moves to dismiss and requests an internal review." Marissa's eyes returned to Kane. "Officer Kane," she said, voice low and final, "your confidence last night was loud. Today, we deal in facts, and facts have consequences. Please step forward." Officer Travis Kane rose like his bones had turned to water. He shuffled to the railing, passing an empty defense table. No Jane Doe in sight. He stopped beneath the bench and stared up at the woman he'd dragged through rain and concrete. "State your name for the record," she ordered. "Officer..." "Travis Kane," he rasped, swallowing hard. "Officer Kane," Judge Marissa Langford leaned forward, fingers laced. "You swore under oath in your affidavit that you arrested the defendant for driving a stolen vehicle at 10:45 p.m. last night. Is that correct?" Kane's lips moved without sound. The system said, "Is it correct?" She snapped. "Yes," he whispered, voice cracking. "And did the defendant identify herself to you?" "Yes." "Did she provide valid identification?" Kane's eyes darted, hunting a rope that wasn't there. I believed it was fake," he said, desperate. Marissa's brows lifted. "You believed a Superior Court judge's ID was fake?" Her voice stayed calm, but it cut deeper than yelling ever could. "Tell me, officer," Marissa continued, touching the concealed bruise along her cheekbone, "when you slammed the defendant against her vehicle, did you feel threatened?" She let the question hang like a blade. "Was a 47-year-old woman in pearls a physical threat to you?" The courtroom turned into stone. The prosecutor's face tightened. Even the court reporter paused, stunned. "I followed protocol," Kane blurted, trembling. Marissa's eyes narrowed. "We'll see." From beneath the bench, she produced a small black device and held it up between two fingers. A body camera unit. When I was processed, Lieutenant Harold Green secured your footage before it could be accidentally corrupted. She tilted her head. Shall we play it? Kane stared at the exit sign like it was a distant country. Marissa didn't blink. Play it, she ordered. Bailiff Marcus Dale signaled the tech clerk. The wall-mounted screen flickered awake. And then, high definition. Audio, unforgiving video. An entire courtroom watched Officer Kane begin to dismantle his own life in real time, one arrogant second at a time. The previous night unspooled on the screen with sick clarity. People watched Kane sneer at the calm woman behind the wheel. They heard rain, the crunch of gravel, the wet thud when her body hit metal. They heard the scrape of cuffs tightening. But worst of all, they heard his voice. Save it for the judge. The room didn't breathe. Marissa froze the frame on Kane's face, twisted with smug contempt, then slowly removed her glasses. Her gaze dropped to the real Kane gripping the railing so hard his knuckles blanched. Save it for the judge, she repeated softly, and somehow it carried to the back row. Officer Kane, you got your wish. I'm the judge. I'm listening. Speak! Kane opened his mouth and produced nothing but air. He looked toward his union counsel, Brent Saylor, a tight-faced man in his late 50s who was frantically flipping through notes like paper could build an escape hatch. Saylor's eyes screamed panic. The prosecutor kept staring at the paused video, jaw slack. Silence sat heavy. It wasn't mercy. It was the calm before an official collapse. Your Honor, Saylor began, voice shaky. My client acted on the information available. The system flagged the vehicle. It was high stress. Marissa's eyes sharpened. High stress? She tapped the console. Watch again. On screen, her hands were visible on the wheel, her voice measured, her movements compliant. The only stress in that equation, Marissa said, was the stress officer Kane carried in. He escalated a routine stop into an assault in under a minute, Marissa continued, voice controlled, lethal. She turned to the prosecutor, Colin Mercer, a seasoned man with ambition written into his posture. In that moment, Mercer looked like proximity alone might scorch his career. Mr. Mercer, Marissa asked, given this footage contradicts the affidavit's claims of belligerence and resistance, how does the state wish to proceed? Mercer stood immediately, buttoning his jacket like he needed armor. Your Honor, the state moves to dismiss all charges against the defendant, Judge Marissa Langford, with prejudice. He didn't look at Kane when he said it, but his voice had steel. Furthermore, the district attorney's office will open an immediate review of Officer Kane's active cases and prior arrest. Motion granted, Marissa said, bringing the gavel down. The crack echoed like a gunshot. Then she leaned forward, robes pooling at her wrists. But we're not finished. Her eyes pinned Kane. Officer Kane, you are held in contempt for submitting a false affidavit in my courtroom. And that, she added softly, is the smallest problem you have today. This footage and my testimony will be forwarded to Internal Affairs and the State Attorney General, Marissa said. You profiled a citizen. You used excessive force. You lied under oath. Kane finally found a voice, thin, brittle. It was a mistake, he croaked. The car, it looked like a drug dealer's car. The air left the room like someone opened a vacuum seal. Marissa froze. The court reporter's hand stopped. Even Dale winced. A drug dealer's car, Marissa repeated, slow and deadly. Because it was a Mercedes, or because I was driving it, Kane's eyes widened as realization arrived too late. He stammered, No, I meant the area, the time of night. His words sounded pathetic against the record he'd just created. Yet the area is a public road, Marissa said, voice dropping into terrifying calm. The time was 10:45 p.m. Neither is a crime. She leaned in. You saw a black woman in a luxury vehicle and decided she didn't belong. You decided she was guilty before you saw her license. That isn't a mistake, Officer Kane. That is a choice. Marissa turned to the bailiff. Mr. Dale, escort Officer Kane to the holding cell. Kane jolted. Marissa continued evenly. Bail for contempt is set at $5,000. Her eyes stayed on him. He can wait downstairs. I believe he knows the route. Kane's face bulged in disbelief, like his brain couldn't accept the courtroom had flipped the script and kept it. You can't arrest me, Kane blurted. I'm a cop. Marissa didn't raise her voice. Not in my courtroom. In here, you are a defendant. Dale approached and took Kane's arm, far gentler than Kane had grabbed hers. The gallery erupted into murmurs. Kane was walked out through the stunned crowd, uniform suddenly looking like a costume he no longer deserved to wear. Kane passed the rookie, Deputy Nolan Price, who refused eye contact. Marissa watched Kane disappear and felt no joy, only exhaustion, the kind that settles in marrow. She looked down at her docket and forced her voice steady. Next case, she said, the people versus Tessa Marlowe. The same young woman from the holding cell was led in, trembling, eyes wide at the judge she'd shared steel air with. Ms. Marlowe, Marissa said gently, I reviewed your file. You were arrested for loitering at a bus stop by Officer Kane roughly 2 hours before my arrest. Is that correct? Tessa swallowed. Yes, Your Honor. Marissa's gavel came down once. Case dismissed. She softened her tone. And Ms. Marlowe, see the clerk. A legal aid group specializing in civil rights is expecting your call. Kane's suspension landed before he even posted bail. By the time he stumbled out of the courthouse that afternoon, stripped of his gun and badge, the story hadn't leaked. It had flooded. Someone inside the system, maybe Lieutenant Green, maybe a clerk with a conscience, sent the footage to the Oak Haven Herald. By 5 p.m., it was everywhere. By 6 p.m., Marissa's name was trending nationwide. Kane went home to a house that felt too quiet. His wife, Lauren, sat at the kitchen table with her phone in hand, the video playing on repeat like a punishment loop. She didn't look up. Tell me that isn't you, she said flatly. Kane dropped his keys, voice pleading. Lauren, let me explain. Her eyes were red. Explain what? The slam? The cuffs? The lies? Kane paced. She set me up. She baited me. Lauren finally lifted her gaze, disgust mixing with grief. She baited you? She echoed. You shoved a 47-year-old woman into a car because she asked why you stopped her and because she was a judge. Kane's face tightened. It'll blow over, he insisted. The union will back me. I've got a clean record. But he didn't. That was the twist he didn't see, because he'd never bothered to look in a mirror. The next morning, Marissa sat in her office, tea cooling beside her. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Mayor, governor, reporters. She ignored them. Instead, she stared at a heavy box delivered by Prosecutor Mercer himself. You need to see this, Mercer had said, dropping it on her desk like it weighed 100 pounds. It was Kane's arrest history. Marissa opened it and felt her stomach drop. The pattern wasn't vague, it was mathematical. Over 6 years, Kane had logged hundreds of arrests for resisting and disorderly conduct. The targets were overwhelmingly people of color. Many cases were dismissed for lack of evidence, or ended in pleas people took just to get out of jail. And one sticky note flagged something worse. A report from a private investigator hired by public defenders months earlier, Ethan Red Harlow, age 41, outlined a tow truck kickback scheme. Kane wasn't just feeding his ego, he was feeding a pipeline. Every impounded vehicle went to one specific yard, Bishop and Sons Towing. The owner wasn't random. It was Kane's cousin, Cal Bishop, age 46, hiding profit behind family distance. A cold shiver ran down Marissa's spine as she connected the dots. The stop wasn't only bias, it was appetite. If Kane could get her Mercedes into that yard, it became a paycheck. A false stolen hit could justify a tow, and the victim would face brutal fees to retrieve their own property if parts hadn't already been lost. Marissa whispered to her empty office, "He isn't just prejudiced, he's a thief." The fall became swift and brutal. Armed with the new evidence, the DA didn't discipline Kane. They built a case. 3 days after the courtroom showdown, Kane sat in his living room with a cheap beer, watching local news replay his humiliation. Then came pounding on the door. Not a neighbor's knock, but the heavy official pounding of consequence. "Search warrant," a voice thundered. The door splintered like it owed the law money. A tactical team flooded the hallway, irony suffocating in every bootstep. Men in uniforms like the one Kane used to wear screamed commands at him. "On the ground!" Kane hit his own carpet hard, face crushed into fibers. Cold cuffs snapped around his wrists, tighter than he ever admitted applying. He was dragged outside, neighbors watching with folded arms and grim faces. No one defended him. No one even pretended surprise. As they shoved Kane into the back of a squad car, he saw a black sedan parked down the street. The window rolled halfway down. Judge Marissa Langford sat inside, expression unreadable. No smile, no gloating, just witness. She watched the scene like a fact being filed. Kane wanted her to look away. She didn't. Not because she enjoyed it, but because truth doesn't avert its eyes once it's finally been seen. The fallout went nuclear. Bishop and Sons' scheme spilled into daylight. Luxury cars stripped, parts swapped, fees inflated, vehicles sold if owners couldn't pay. Kane was charged with racketeering, grand larceny, official misconduct, assault, and deprivation of rights under color of law. Lauren filed for divorce the day after the raid. She took the kids and left the state, Idaho, near her sister, because she refused to raise them inside his shadow. The union cut Kane loose when the evidence stopped being deniable. A statement hit the news condemning his actions as criminal and outside professional standards. Kane read it in a holding cell and felt the floor tilt. Then came the civil suits. Dozens at first, then hundreds. Prosecutor Mercer moved to review every case Kane touched. Convictions were overturned, pleas re-examined. The city's liability exploded like a gas line lit by a match. To limit the blast radius, the city council authorized a massive settlement fund for victims. The Sunday papers headline screamed, "Oak Haven approves $13 million settlement pool in Kane cases." Kane, now in county jail, read it with shaking hands. His pension was gone. Assets frozen. House sliding into foreclosure to pay legal fees. He wasn't just ruined. He was publicly, permanently branded, trapped inside consequences of his own making. People like to say justice grinds slowly. For Kane, it felt like the gears suddenly found traction and didn't stop. The next 19 months became depositions, audits, and a relentless media circus that turned quiet Oak Haven into a national battleground. Reporters camped outside court. Activists marched. Politicians postured. Every headline carved another piece off Kane's old identity. The rain from that first night felt like it never truly stopped falling over his life. The trial became the highest-rated broadcast in county history. Kane wasn't facing a simple assault charge. Mercer went for the throat. Racketeering, grand larceny, perjury, official misconduct, deprivation of rights. Kane's defense tried the classic song, overworked officer, split-second judgment, high crime area. But the video wouldn't sing along. It showed no split second. It showed deliberate escalation, confidence as cruelty, performed in under a minute. On the stand, Kane looked smaller than anyone remembered. The footage replayed again and again, each time stripping another layer of excuse. He wasn't a protector caught in chaos. He was a predator hunting paperwork that could become profit. When the verdict came guilty on all counts, Kane didn't scream. He didn't cry. He simply slumped, hollowed out, like the person he used to be had evaporated and left only a shell behind for the cameras. Judge Langford didn't sentence him. Conflict of interest made that impossible. The sentencing fell to Judge Elliot Reynolds, a stern old-school jurist in his early 70s who hated nothing more than a dirty cop poisoning the legitimacy of the law. 15 years, Reynolds declared, voice echoing like thunder. No parole eligibility for the first 10. You betrayed your badge, Mr. Kane. Now you'll live with what you did to others. A year and a half later, that sentence became Kane's entire universe. He was no longer Officer Kane. He was inmate 9174 at Greystone State Penitentiary, a brutal concrete machine filled with men who despised cops. For his safety, he was kept in protective custody. PC, as staff called it, Punk City, as the rest of the prison mocked, 23 hours a day in a cell the size of a parking space. His 1 hour of recreation happened alone, in a narrow cage of chain link and gray sky. The privilege he earned after months of compliance was a trustee job, pushing a mop bucket through the visitation corridor. Industrial bleach burned his nose, reminding him of precinct-holding cells, the same kind he'd used as a threat. The irony clung to him like damp clothing. He tried not to think about Lauren and the kids. It always found him anyway. On a muted TV in the visitation area, a headline crawled across the bottom. Justice Marissa Langford to speak at community center opening. Kane stopped mopping. He leaned on the handle and stared as her image filled the screen. She looked stronger than ever, unbroken, sharpened. The scandal hadn't harmed her. It had forged her. The anchor praised her integrity. Kane felt something twist in his throat, envy, shame, and a hunger to rewrite history. The camera cut to a bright, glass-front building in the district Kane once patrolled like a personal hunting ground. A banner hung above the door, the Langford Center for Justice and Reform. Kane's stomach tightened. A corrections officer, Davis Holt, age 44, ambled by and tapped the TV with his baton. "She's something, huh?" Holt said, enjoying the sting. Kane didn't answer. Holt chuckled. "Heard she used the settlement money to build it. Every dime. That place provides free lawyers for folks bad cops roughed up," Holt continued, voice sweet with cruelty. "So in a way, you helped pour the foundation." Kane's hands clenched around the mop handle until his knuckles went white. "I was doing my job," he whispered, the lie he still used as a blanket. Holt snorted. "Nah, you were doing time. You just didn't know it yet." Holt walked off laughing, leaving Kane alone with the screen. Miles away, inside the warmth of the newly opened center, Justice Langford stood at a podium as applause rolled like thunder. She didn't speak of revenge. She didn't say Kane's name. He was a footnote now, a cautionary tale. "Justice isn't something we wait for," she told the crowd, voice calm, resonant. "It's a structure we build, choice by choice. Sometimes," she added, "we build it from the wreckage of our dignity." In the front row sat Tessa Marlowe, the young woman from the holding cell. She wasn't shivering in torn denim anymore. She wore a blazer and held a clipboard, eyes steady. The center's new intake coordinator. Marissa had paid for rehab, helped her earn a GED, then offered work with purpose. Tessa smiled up at her, genuine and hopeful. That smile, quiet proof of change, meant more to Marissa than any settlement check ever could. After the speech, Marissa slipped out a side door to avoid cameras. Her driver waited with the same silver Mercedes GLE. She refused to sell it. Selling it would imply the car was the problem. The car wasn't the problem. Bias was. Keeping it felt like defiance, a rolling reminder that she belonged anywhere she chose to be. She slid into the leather seat, exhaled, and let exhaustion briefly soften her shoulders. "Home, Justice Langford?" the driver asked. "Not yet," Marissa replied, pulling a worn letter from her purse. The edges were soft from being handled too many times. It was from Kane, sent 6 months earlier. He begged, but he didn't apologize for harming her, only for what he lost. He complained about food, about missing his kids, about unfairness. He asked her to advocate for a sentence reduction as a woman of faith. Marissa stared at the letter like it was evidence of a missing soul. "Take me to the post office," she said. When the car stopped, she didn't get out. She rolled down the window and read Kane's words one last time. She thought of Tessa's terror, of the hundreds of victims, of vehicles stolen under color of law, of lives forced into pleas just to escape cages. Then she tore the letter neatly, once, twice, until it became confetti. She leaned out and dropped the paper scraps into the curbside trash. "No sentence reduction for a man who still doesn't understand the crime," she murmured. She rolled the window up. "Now take me home." The Mercedes purred forward through wet streets. Marissa watched Oak Haven pass, a town still flawed, still fighting, but a little safer than before. Behind her eyes she carried fatigue, not triumph. Justice wasn't a moment. It was maintenance. Back at Greystone, Kane lay on his bunk staring at the ceiling as the lights flickered. Somewhere down the block, a heavy metal door slammed, finality ringing through concrete. He turned toward the wall, jaw clenched. For the first time, he truly understood the cruelty in his own favorite line. It returned to him like a curse he'd carved into the world. Save it for the judge. The judge had heard him. The verdict had stuck. People later called it the story of one arrogant stop that toppled an entire corruption pipeline. Kane thought his badge let him decide who belonged and who didn't. He judged by appearance, by zip code, by skin, by the shine of a vehicle, then forced the facts to match his narrative. But the law doesn't stay bent forever. Eventually, it snaps back. And when it did, it didn't just correct him. It crushed the entire machine he fed. Justice Langford didn't just win her own case. She used the pain to build a shield for others, funding lawyers, training, oversight, and second chances where the system used to offer only cages. She never framed it as revenge. She framed it as structure. She framed it as courage. And in doing so, she made something permanent out of something meant to humiliate her. That is what terrified people like Kane most. She didn't break. The Langford Center's doors stayed open late, lights bright against the old industrial blocks. Every week, new faces arrived. People with summons, bruises, and stories no one had wanted to hear. They found attorneys. They found advocates. They found a place that believed them. Oak Haven couldn't erase its past, but it could stop pretending it didn't exist. And in quiet offices behind glass walls, paperwork became power, used for protection instead of profit. Marissa kept moving forward, even when exhaustion tried to pull her under. Some nights, she still felt the cold metal against her cheek, still heard rain tapping glass like impatient fingers. But she refused to let that night define her as victim. She had been a judge before the cuffs, and she was a judge after. The difference now was clarity. She'd seen the system from the inside of the cage, and she refused to look away again. Kane, meanwhile, clung to excuses like they were life rafts. In letters he never mailed, he blamed pressure, the job, the neighborhood, the flagged system. He blamed everyone but himself. Yet the simplest truth remained the one he couldn't swallow. Nothing forced his hand to shove, to mock, to lie. He chose it. And prison has a way of stripping choices down to their bones, leaving you alone with what you were when no one could stop you. In the months that followed, Oak Haven's policies shifted. Body cam retention tightened, tow rotation audited, complaint review boards empowered. Some changes were real, some were cosmetic. But the footage ensured one thing: the town could never claim ignorance again. Every reform meeting began with the same uncomfortable silence, because everyone had seen what arrogance looked like under fluorescent light and courtroom microphones. Public memory became a lever, and Marissa kept pressing down. Years later, people would still argue about her choice that night, why she didn't reveal her identity immediately, why she waited for court. Marissa never explained in interviews. She didn't need to. The record explained it. A slap on the wrist teaches nothing to a man who thinks his power is natural law. A public lesson, cold, procedural, undeniable, teaches the town too. Because Kane wasn't an isolated storm. He was a symptom that thrived in quiet. Marissa knew justice wasn't about humiliating Kane the way he tried to humiliate her. It was about drawing a bright line where the system had allowed shadows. In court, she didn't rage. She documented. She preserved. She forced accountability into the daylight and made it stay there. That's why the consequences spread beyond one officer into tow yards, case files, settlement funds, and policy changes. The law didn't get emotional. It got precise, and precision when aimed at corruption is terrifying. It doesn't forget. It doesn't get tired the way outrage does. It becomes record, precedent, structure, the kind of structure people can use long after the headlines fade. Marissa understood that deeply, maybe more deeply than she ever wanted to. She carried that knowledge into every ruling afterward, especially the small cases the world ignored, because it's in the small cases where bad power practices its habits. On the day Kane finally stopped blaming everyone else, if that day ever truly came, no cameras were there to broadcast it. No applause, no speeches, only a concrete ceiling and the echo of doors. That's the quiet truth of consequences. They don't need an audience. Kane had spent years performing authority for attention. In the end, authority became something he watched from behind glass, measured, calm, and completely uninterested in his excuses. So here's the question people still ask. If you were in Justice Langford's shoes, what would you have done? Would you have revealed who you were immediately and ended it fast, risking a quiet slap on the wrist? Or would you have waited, endured the cage, and forced the truth into public record so it couldn't be buried? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one, and the best ones always spark debate. If this story hit you, if you felt the tension, the injustice, and the cold satisfaction of the record snapping shut, tap like. It helps more than you think. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and you won't miss the next story where power gets tested and truth shows up with receipts. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Authority without humility turns dangerous fast. If you've lived long enough to remember segregated water fountains and yes sir fear, you know a badge can become a weapon when ego drops the patrol car. Kane didn't stop a thief. He chased a story he wanted to be true, and he used cuffs to force it. Accountability must be public to last. Marissa didn't win by shouting. She won by staying steady, preserving facts, and bringing the truth into daylight. Video, oath, record. That's how a town changes. Not with rumors, but with receipts that hit like a hammer. If you were in Justice Langford's shoes, would you have revealed who you were on the roadside, or waited and let the courtroom expose the truth for everyone to see? Think back to a time you saw power misused, at work, in a hospital, or on your street. What should a citizen do in that moment? Drop your answer in the comments. Tap like if this story moved you, and subscribe so you don't miss stories where facts and justice collide.